The snow didn't fall gently that night. It came down hard, relentless, swallowing the forest, and every sound a man might use to call for help. Somewhere beneath the frozen trees, a Navy SEAL lay bleeding into the white ground, his strength fading with every shallow breath. He believed the war had finally caught up to him, not on a battlefield, but alone, far from anyone who would ever know how he died. Miles away, an old veteran, who had long buried his uniform, was preparing for another silent night, convinced his fighting days were over. But when his German shepherd suddenly pulled toward the darkness, something ancient stirred inside him, an instinct he thought God had let him leave behind. That night 3 lives crossed paths in the snow, not by chance, not by coincidence. Some miracles don't arrive with light from the heavens. They arrive through obedience, loyalty, and a faith that refuses to turn away when someone else is dying. And what happened before dawn would prove that no soldier ever truly walks alone, especially when God decides it's not their time. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, drop your city in the comments, and if you believe God sends the right animals at the right moment, hit subscribe, because this story might restore your faith in purpose and in miracles. Late afternoon settled over the northern Montana wilderness as pale light weakened behind rows of snow-laden pine trees, the air sharp, silent, and heavy with an approaching night. Lucas Reed stumbled through the forest, as if the land itself were resisting him. He was 32, tall and powerfully built beneath layers of torn winter gear, the kind of physique shaped by years of Navy SEAL training rather than comfort. His dark hair was matted with sweat and melting snow, and a short, untrimmed beard framed a jaw clenched in constant pain. His face, once hardened by discipline and confidence, now bore the gray pallor of blood loss, lips faintly blue from cold. Every step he took sent a fresh surge of agony through his abdomen, where a deep gunshot wound bled steadily, despite the pressure bandage he had wrapped with shaking hands hours earlier. The snow beneath his boots darkened with each movement, red seeping into white like ink spreading across paper. Lucas was acutely aware of how much blood he was losing. Combat training made it impossible not to calculate it. He knew the numbers, he knew the limits, and he knew, with the same clarity that had once guided him through hostile territory, that he was running out of time. The mission had gone wrong before dawn. What should have been a clean extraction had dissolved into confusion, gunfire, and smoke. He remembered the sharp bark of orders over the radio, the sudden explosion that threw him against frozen ground, and the sensation of something tearing deep inside his body. After that came only fragments, running, falling, firing blindly into shadows, and then silence. His team was gone, whether scattered or dead, he could not tell. The radio had failed hours ago, its screen cracked, its signal lost to the mountains and storm clouds. Lucas leaned heavily against a tree, his gloved hand leaving a smeared print of blood on the bark. His breath came in short, visible bursts, each exhale carrying warmth he could not afford to lose. He forced himself to straighten, his shoulders squaring out of habit, as if an unseen commander still watched him. He had survived worse than this, he told himself. Hot deserts, suffocating jungles, cities torn apart by war. But none of those places had been this cold, this quiet, this indifferent. A sound drifted through the forest, soft, distant, and unmistakably deliberate. Lucas froze, every muscle tensing despite the pain. It could have been a deer breaking through snow or wind shifting branches. But instinct, sharpened by years of being hunted and hunting others, told him otherwise. The sound came again, closer now, footsteps, measured and careful, They were still looking for him. Fear rose, sharp and sudden, but it was not the panicked fear of a civilian. It was controlled, cold, edged with anger. Lucas forced himself to move again, pushing deeper between the trees. His legs trembled, threatening to give out entirely. With every step, his vision blurred at the edges, the forest tilting as though the ground itself were unstable. He remembered faces then, men he had trained with, joked with, trusted with his life. He remembered promises made quietly, never spoken aloud, that none of them would be left behind. The irony burned almost as much as the wound. If he died here, there would be no flag, no folded cloth handed to waiting hands, just snow, trees, and silence. The forest thickened ahead, rocks rising unevenly from the ground. Lucas spotted a shallow hollow formed by a fallen boulder, half hidden beneath drifts of snow and tangled roots. Summoning the last of his strength, he dragged himself toward it, collapsing hard onto his knees before crawling inside. The cold stone pressed against his back, stealing what little warmth remained, but it was shelter, imperfect and temporary, yet enough to hide him from a passing glance. He pressed himself into the narrow space, drawing his knees up as carefully as he could, teeth gritted to keep from crying out. His hands fumbled at his jacket, checking the wound again. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped. He knew what that meant. Internal damage, infection if he somehow survived the night. His training offered solutions, medical procedures he had practiced countless times, but none of them could be done alone in the dark, with numb fingers and fading consciousness. The sounds outside grew quieter, then stopped altogether. Lucas strained to listen, every nerve alive with tension. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time became meaningless, stretching and compressing in strange ways. The cold crept deeper into his bones, his fingers stiffening until even clenching them became difficult. For the first time since he was a teenager, Lucas allowed himself to think that this might be the end. He had joined the military young, driven by a need to prove something he had never fully understood. His father, a rigid man with few words and many disappointments, had shaped him as much through absence as presence. Training had given Lucas structure, purpose, and eventually pride. The SEALs had given him a family forged in hardship and trust. And now, lying alone beneath a rock in the frozen wilderness, he wondered what any of it would mean if no one ever knew how his story ended. His breathing slowed, growing shallow despite his efforts to control it. Darkness pressed in from the corners of his vision, stars flickering where there should have been only shadow. He pressed his forehead against his knees, trying to hold himself together through sheer will. "Stay awake," he whispered hoarsely, the words fogging the air before his lips. "Just stay awake." Another sound reached him then, faint but different from before. It was not the careful crunch of boots, nor the random movement of animals. It was lighter, quicker, accompanied by a low, huffing breath. Lucas lifted his head slightly, heart pounding. A shape moved between the trees, low to the ground, fluid, purposeful. For a moment, hope flared irrationally, bright and dangerous. But the shape disappeared again, swallowed by the falling snow. Lucas let his head fall back against the stone. His eyelids drooped, exhaustion finally overpowering fear. He did not know if the sound had been real or imagined, a trick of a dying mind searching for rescue where none existed. Above him the sky darkened fully as night claimed the forest. Snow began to fall more heavily, soft flakes drifting down in silence, covering tracks, blood, and evidence alike. Lucas Reed closed his eyes, unsure if he would ever open them again, suspended between survival and surrender as the wilderness prepared to decide his fate. Several miles away, dusk pressed quietly against the edge of the northern Montana forest, and the snow began to fall with a patience that suggested it would not stop any time soon. Daniel Harper stood beside his weathered log cabin, splitting firewood with slow, practiced swings, his breath rising in teddy white clouds. At 55, Daniel was tall but lean, his frame hardened rather than bulky, shaped by years of military service and decades of living close to unforgiving land. His shoulders were slightly stooped, not from weakness but from old injuries that had never healed properly. A gray-streaked beard framed a face carved with deep lines, the kind earned through long winters, sleepless nights, and decisions made under pressure. His eyes were pale blue, sharp and observant, carrying the calm of a man who had learned long ago that panic never saved anyone. Daniel's life after the army had grown deliberately quiet. Once a reconnaissance specialist, he had spent his best years reading terrain, tracking movement, and surviving where others failed. The war had left him with scars that were not immediately visible, memories of men he could not bring home, orders that haunted him when the world went silent. He spoke little now, trusted few people, and preferred the company of the forest and one living soul who never asked questions. Axel, his German shepherd, lay near the cabin steps, 5 years old, broad-chested and powerful, with a thick black and tan coat already dusted with snow. His ears were sharp and alert even at rest, his amber eyes intelligent and constantly scanning. Axel had not been raised from a puppy by Daniel. He had come from a decommissioned military canine program, already trained, already carrying habits no civilian dog ever fully shook. There was a discipline in the way he moved, a restraint in his silence, and a loyalty that bordered on instinct rather than affection. Daniel had recognized it immediately, the same look he had seen in mirrors years ago. Axel rose suddenly, muscles tightening beneath his fur, his ears snapped forward, a low growl vibrating in his chest. The leash tugged hard as he pulled toward the tree line, nose high, body angled into the wind. Daniel froze. He had learned to listen when the forest changed its tone. This was not the alert of a deer or a wandering elk. It was focused, deliberate, something human. He set the axe down slowly, his hand already reaching for the old canvas pack hanging by the door. Inside were items he never expected to need again: a field dressing kit yellowed with age, medical tape, painkillers long past their expiration date, and a compact emergency blanket. He slung the pack over his shoulder, then picked up his hunting rifle, checking it with automatic precision. Axel strained again, more urgently this time. "All right," Daniel muttered, voice rough from disuse. "Show me." They moved into the forest together, Axel leading, Daniel following with careful, silent steps. Snow muffled their movement, but Daniel's eyes were sharp, scanning the ground, the trees, the spaces between. Axel's pace quickened as they descended into thicker terrain, weaving between pines and rock formations where shadows grew deeper. The light was fading fast, and Daniel knew the temperature would drop sharply once night fully settled. After several minutes, Axel slowed, then stopped abruptly. His body stiffened, tail low but steady. Daniel followed his line of sight and felt his chest tighten. A dark shape lay ahead, half hidden beneath a rocky outcrop, snow stained an ugly brown-red around it. Daniel approached cautiously, kneeling beside the man sprawled against the stone. Even unconscious, Lucas Reed looked formidable. Tall, broad-shouldered, his torn tactical gear clinging to a body built for endurance. His dark hair was wet with sweat and melting snow, his beard rough and untrimmed. His face was pale, lips cracked, breath shallow and uneven. Daniel didn't hesitate. He cut away the fabric around the wound with a small knife, his movements efficient despite the stiffness in his hands. The injury was bad, a deep gunshot wound to the abdomen, the blood already thickening in the cold. But the bleeding had slowed naturally and Lucas was still breathing. That alone meant there was time. "Lucky bastard," Daniel murmured, not unkindly. Axel moved closer, lying down beside Lucas, pressing his body against the injured man's side. Daniel noticed how the dog angled himself deliberately, blocking the wind. He didn't question it. Axel knew what he was doing. Daniel worked quickly, packing the wound, reinforcing the pressure bandage, murmuring instructions to himself the way he had done years ago under far worse conditions. As he worked, he studied Lucas's face, the set of his jaw, the tension even in unconsciousness. This was a man trained to survive, someone who had fought long past what most bodies could endure. Daniel exhaled slowly. The odds were still terrible. Night was coming. The nearest road was miles away. Carrying Lucas back to the cabin was impossible alone, and leaving him here meant death by exposure. A faint sound drifted through the trees then, distant, barely audible, but unmistakable. Movement, not Axel's kind. Human footsteps, careful but persistent. Daniel straightened slightly, eyes narrowing. He felt something stir inside him, something old and unwelcome. The forest had been his refuge for years. Now, once again, it was becoming a battlefield. He checked Lucas's pulse one last time, then looked at Axel. The dog met his gaze, eyes steady, waiting. "Guard," Daniel whispered. Axel remained pressed to Lucas's side, muscles taut, ears tracking the sound beyond the trees. Daniel rose slowly, stepping into the shadows, positioning himself where he could see without being seen. His rifle felt familiar in his hands, an extension of his will rather than a tool. The footsteps never came. Closer. After several long minutes, they faded, swallowed by the forest and falling snow. Whether whoever had been searching gave up or circled wide, Daniel could not know. But he knew one thing with certainty. Staying here was no longer an option. He returned to Lucas and Axel, kneeling once more. "We're moving," he said softly, as if the unconscious man could hear him. "Bassett, you just hang on." Axel rose immediately, stepping back to give Daniel room. Together they began the slow, brutal work of preparing for a journey into the deepening night. 3 soldiers bound by circumstance and instinct, with the forest watching silently as it always had. The temperature dropped with ruthless speed as the last traces of daylight bled out of the sky, and the forest seemed to close in, branches creaking softly under the growing weight of snow. Daniel Harper finished stabilizing Lucas Reed, with movements that felt both painfully familiar and strangely distant, as if his hands remembered a life his mind had tried to forget. He reinforced the pressure on the abdominal wound, secured Lucas's torso to minimize movement, and wrapped an emergency blanket around him to trap what little warmth remained. Decades earlier, these motions had been second nature. Now they stirred memories he had buried under years of solitude. Lucas remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. His face, framed by dark stubble, twitched occasionally as though fragments of the failed mission still played behind his closed eyes. Even in collapse, his body retained a soldier's tension, muscles taut, jaw clenched against pain he could no longer consciously fight. Daniel studied him briefly, recognizing the signs. Lucas was young enough to survive this, if the night did not claim him first. Axel pressed close to Lucas's side, his broad frame deliberately angled to shield the injured man from the wind. The German shepherd's thick coat was already rimmed with frost, his breath slow and controlled. At 5 years old, Axel was in his prime, powerful without recklessness, alert without panic. His amber eyes never stopped moving, scanning the darkness between the trees. He did not whine, did not fidget. He understood the situation with the clarity of an animal trained for chaos. Daniel rose slowly, joints protesting as he straightened. The forest around them had grown quieter, not peaceful, but tense, as if waiting. Snow fell heavier now, thick flakes swirling sideways as the wind shifted. He knew this weather. By midnight, visibility would be near zero, and temperatures could plunge low enough to kill a healthy man, let alone one bleeding internally. Going back to the cabin was impossible. Carrying Lucas alone over uneven ground for miles would cost precious time and strength Daniel no longer possessed. Leaving Lucas where he lay was a death sentence. Daniel's mind worked quickly, mapping the terrain. A memory surfaced, an old hunting outpost, abandoned years ago, barely more than a shack, but solid enough to block the wind. It lay just over a kilometer northeast, uphill and partially sheltered by rock formations. A dangerous choice, but the only one. "We're moving," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than to Lucas. His voice was calm, but beneath it ran the familiar current of command. He adjusted the straps he had improvised from rope and canvas, securing Lucas so he could be dragged rather than carried. Axel watched closely, ears twitching, as if committing every step to memory. They set off into the forest, Daniel pulling with steady determination, while Axel moved ahead, disappearing briefly into the darkness before circling back. The dog's movements were purposeful, efficient. He checked paths instinctively, avoided unstable ground, and paused whenever the wind carried unfamiliar scents. More than once he stopped and looked back, waiting for Daniel and Lucas to catch up before continuing. It was impossible not to see the echo of military drills in his behavior. The climb was brutal. Daniel's breath burned his lungs, and his legs trembled under the strain. Old injuries flared. His left knee, shattered by shrapnel decades earlier, throbbed with every step. But he did not slow. He could not afford to. Each minute stolen by fatigue was a minute the cold took from Lucas. At one point, Lucas stirred faintly, a low sound escaping his throat. Daniel stopped immediately, kneeling beside him. Lucas's eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused and glassy. He tried to speak, failed, then sank back into unconsciousness. "Stay with me," Daniel murmured, adjusting the blanket. "You don't get to quit yet." They pressed on, the forest growing steeper and more hostile as night fully claimed the land. Snow filled Daniel's beard, clung to his jacket, numbed his fingers despite thick gloves. His world narrowed to breath movement and the steady rhythm of Axel's returns from the dark. Then Axel froze. He stood rigid on a narrow ridge, ears pricked forward, body low. Daniel halted instantly, heart pounding. The wind carried a faint sound, metal against fabric perhaps, or the subtle crunch of footsteps far below. Someone else was out there. Daniel's grip tightened on the rope. He scanned the darkness, mind racing. If they were being tracked, speed mattered more than stealth now. He made a quick decision, angling toward a cluster of rocks that would hide their trail from direct sight. Axel seemed to understand, altering course without command. Minutes stretched unbearably long as they navigated the last stretch. Daniel's arms screamed with pain, shoulders burning as he dragged Lucas over ice-slick ground. Just when his strength threatened to fail entirely, Axel stopped again, this time with a different posture. His tail lifted slightly, alert but calm. The hunting outpost emerged from the darkness like a ghost. It was little more than a single-room wooden structure, roof sagging under snow, door half buried but intact. Daniel exhaled sharply, relief cutting through exhaustion. Inside, the air was stale but dry. Daniel forced the door open, hauled Lucas inside, and shut out the wind. Axel followed immediately, positioning himself between Lucas and the entrance as Daniel worked. The interior held the remnants of another life, a rusted stove, a broken table, empty hooks on the walls. But it was shelter, and that was enough. Daniel laid Lucas down carefully, reinforcing insulation with spare clothing and the emergency blanket. He checked the wound again, relieved to find no fresh bleeding. Lucas's pulse was weak, but present for a long moment. Daniel simply sat back against the wall, chest heaving, eyes closed. The silence inside the shack was profound, broken only by the wind howling outside and Lucas's labored breathing. Daniel felt the weight of the decision settle into his bones. He had crossed a line he thought he would never approach again. He had chosen engagement over isolation, responsibility over retreat. Axel settled beside Lucas once more, his head resting near the injured man's chest, eyes still open. The dog would not sleep tonight. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at them both. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the wood, three figures shared the same space. One young soldier fighting to live, one old soldier rediscovering what it meant to act, and one dog who had never stopped being what he was trained to be. Outside, the snowstorm deepened, erasing tracks, burying signs, and sealing the forest into silence. Inside the shack, the race with the night had been won. For now, night deepened around the abandoned hunting outpost as the storm tightened its grip, snow hammering softly against the warped wooden walls like countless quiet warnings. Inside, Daniel Harper sat motionless near the doorway, rifle resting across his knees, every sense sharpened by instinct he had never truly lost. The dim interior smelled of damp wood and rusted metal, and the cold crept in through unseen cracks despite the shelter. Lucas Reed lay several feet away, wrapped tightly in layers, his breathing shallow but steady, each rise and fall of his chest a fragile promise that the night had not yet won. Axel remained on his feet, positioned near the door with deliberate intent. His muscular frame was still, but not relaxed. The tension beneath his thick black and tan coat was unmistakable. His ears twitched at the slightest sound, his amber eyes reflecting faint light like embers. At 5 years old, Axel had long since outgrown impulsive aggression. What remained was something far more dangerous. Discipline shaped by training, patience earned through experience. He did not bark. He waited. Daniel had stepped outside briefly earlier, careful to mask his own tracks as best he could, and that was when he saw them. Faint impressions in the snow, partially filled but not erased. Human footprints, more than one set. They circled the outpost once, cautiously, as if testing the silence. Whoever made them knew how to move into snow, knew how to avoid drawing attention. That knowledge alone told Daniel enough. These were not lost hikers or curious locals. Someone was hunting Lucas Reed. Daniel's jaw tightened. the lines in his weathered face deepening. He extinguished the small lantern without hesitation, plunging the shack into darkness. Light attracted eyes, and eyes invited bullets. He trusted Axel to see what he could not. The hours that followed stretched thin and brittle. Wind howled outside, occasionally drowning out subtler sounds, but Axel's body language shifted long before Daniel heard anything himself. The dog's head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring, tail stiffening. A low vibration rumbled in his chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but a signal meant for one man alone. Daniel raised his rifle slowly, breath controlled. He moved to the narrow side window, peering through a gap between boards. Shapes flickered at the edge of visibility, darker shadows against darkness. Men moving in a loose arc, careful not to silhouette themselves against the snow. Daniel counted at least 2, possibly 3. Their pace was measured, confident. Hunters, not scavengers. One of them stepped closer to the shack. In the faint ambient light, Daniel caught a glimpse of him, a tall man, broad-shouldered beneath winter tactical gear, his face partially obscured by a scarf. A short beard edged his jaw, dark against pale skin, and his movements were economical, almost professional. There was no panic in him, no hesitation. This was a man used to following orders without asking why. Daniel felt a flicker of something old and bitter. He had worn that same posture once. Axel shifted his weight, claws barely scraping the wooden floor. Daniel placed a hand briefly on the dog's neck, grounding both of them. They waited. The first sound came suddenly, a boot brushing loose snow too close to the door. Axel reacted instantly, lunging forward with a sharp bark that shattered the silence. Daniel moved at the same moment, slamming his shoulder into the door to throw it open just enough. Cold air rushed in, carrying confusion with it. Daniel fired once, deliberately wide, the shot cracking through the night. It wasn't meant to hit, it was meant to speak. The response was immediate. Voices hissed sharply. Footsteps scrambling backward. Axel charged to the threshold, teeth bared, body blocking the entrance like a living wall. In the chaos, Daniel glimpsed movement to the left, another figure trying to circle wide. Daniel stepped out just enough to draw attention, firing again, this time striking a tree trunk inches from the man's head. Wood splintered and the figure stumbled back into the storm. "Fall back," someone shouted, the words torn apart by wind and fear. Axel did not pursue. He stood his ground, muscles coiled, eyes blazing. Daniel retreated inside, slamming the door shut, heart pounding but mind clear. The confrontation had lasted seconds, no more, but it had shifted the balance. Whoever they were, they now knew this was not an easy target. Minutes passed, then more. The storm intensified, snow swallowing sound and sight alike. Axel remained vigilant, but slowly, almost reluctantly, the tension eased from his stance. Daniel allowed himself a breath. They had withdrawn. Daniel returned to Lucas, kneeling beside him. The younger man stirred faintly, brow furrowing as if the echoes of danger reached him even in unconsciousness. Daniel checked his pulse again, weak but present. "You're stubborn," Daniel muttered quietly. "That helps." Near the back wall of the shack, Daniel noticed something he had overlooked earlier. A rusted radio mounted above a small shelf, its casing dented but intact. It was an old hunter's emergency unit, likely powered by a hand crank or backup battery. Daniel felt a cautious surge of hope. He worked silently, adjusting the antenna, testing the power. Static hissed softly at first, then steadied. He waited, counting seconds, then pressed the transmit switch. "This is Daniel Harper," he said into the microphone, voice low but firm. "Civilian emergency. One injured male, critical condition. Coordinates approximate northern Montana wilderness. Request immediate response." Static answered him. Daniel repeated the message, slower this time. He waited again. Finally, a faint reply crackled through the noise. Fragmented, distant, but unmistakably human. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, relief washing through him like warmth. Axel lay down. Beside Lucas once more, his role as sentry fulfilled for the moment. Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and cleansing, erasing the tracks of hunters and prey alike. Inside the shack, 3 lives remained bound together, the night's danger not gone, but held at bay until dawn. Dawn arrived late, reluctant and pale, pushing through the remnants of the snowstorm like a quiet apology. The sky over northern Montana shifted from iron gray to a muted blue, and the forest slowly revealed itself again. Trees bowed under fresh snow, branches glittering faintly as light returned. The storm had exhausted itself during the night, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt sacred. Inside the abandoned hunting outpost, Daniel Harper was already awake. He had not slept. Men like him rarely did when responsibility rested in their hands. He sat near Lucas Reed, one knee drawn up, the other extended stiffly, his back against the wall. In the weak morning light slipping through the cracks, Daniel looked older than his 55 years. The gray in his beard was more pronounced, his weathered skin drawn tight across high cheekbones and a strong but tired jaw. His pale blue eyes, however, remained sharp, alert, measuring, unwilling to surrender vigilance even when the night had passed. Lucas lay still, his breathing shallow but more regular than before. His color had improved slightly, the deadly gray giving way to a fragile hint of life. The bandages Daniel had reinforced during the night were soaked but holding. Pain lined Lucas's face, even in unconsciousness, his brow furrowed, lips parted as if caught mid-breath between worlds. His body, tall and powerfully built, bore the unmistakable marks of a man who had trained to endure far beyond normal limits. Yet even that strength had its boundaries, and Daniel knew they had arrived just in time. Axel sat near the doorway, upright and composed. Snow clung to the thick fur around his legs and chest, but he seemed unaware of the cold. At 5 years old, the German shepherd carried himself with the dignity of a seasoned veteran. His ears were still alert, though no immediate threat remained, and his amber eyes followed every shift of light outside. He had not moved far from Lucas all night, his presence constant, wordless, and absolute. If Axel felt fatigue, he did not show it. The radio crackled softly, breaking the silence. Daniel leaned forward instantly, fingers closing around the worn microphone. This time, the voice that answered was clearer, steadier. "Signal confirmed," the operator said. "Rescue unit inbound. ETA 20 minutes. Hold position." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, not in relief. He had learned never to trust relief too early, but in acknowledgement. The responsibility he had carried through the night was finally shifting to other hands. True to their word, the distant thrum of rotors reached the forest not long after, faint at first, then unmistakable. Axel's ears twitched, but he remained calm, watching Daniel rather than the sky. Daniel stepped outside as the sound grew louder, raising his arm to signal through the thinning snowfall. The helicopter emerged above the trees, dark and solid, against the brightening sky, wind whipping snow into spirals around it. The rescue team moved quickly and efficiently when they touched down in a nearby clearing. They were soldiers, men and women trained for moments exactly like this. One of them, Captain Andrew Cole, approached Daniel first. Cole was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, his uniform marked with years of service. His face was clean-shaven, his expression controlled but respectful. He took in Daniel's posture, his rifle, the dog at his side, and understood immediately that this man was not a civilian who had stumbled into trouble. "You the one who called it in?" Cole asked. Daniel nodded once. "He's inside. Gunshot wound. Abdominal. He needs a hospital." They moved Lucas onto a stretcher with practiced care, stabilizing him further as they worked. As they lifted him, Lucas stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening. His gaze moved across unfamiliar faces, the interior of the shack, and finally settled on Daniel and Axel. For a moment, confusion crossed Lucas's face, then understanding. His throat worked as he tried to speak. "You didn't leave," he managed, voice hoarse and barely audible. Daniel stepped closer, his expression unchanged, but his eyes softer than they had been all night. "No," he said simply. "We don't do that." Axel leaned forward slightly, his nose brushing Lucas's gloved hand. Lucas's fingers twitched weakly, making contact with the dog's fur. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth before exhaustion reclaimed him. As the stretcher was carried toward the helicopter, Daniel followed for a few steps, then stopped. He knew this was where his part ended. The rotor wash whipped snow around him, flattening his jacket against his lean frame, tugging at his beard and hair. He stood unmoving, one hand resting on Axel's back, watching as Lucas was secured and lifted away. The helicopter rose, its sound fading into the open sky, carrying Lucas Reed toward survival, toward a future that had nearly been stolen from him. The forest grew quiet once more. Daniel remained where he was long after the helicopter vanished, the cold seeping back into his bones now that adrenaline no longer held it at bay. Memories surfaced unbidden, faces of men he had once watched disappear into smoke and chaos, never to return. For years he had told himself he was done, that he had given enough, that isolation was peace. But standing there in the snow, Axel steady at his side, Daniel understood something he had avoided for decades. A soldier does not stop being a soldier when the uniform comes off. The war does not end when the orders do. It simply waits, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, until a moment demands the same courage again. Daniel turned back toward the forest path that led to his cabin. The outpost behind him would soon be reclaimed by snow and silence. No one would mark what had happened there. No one would write it down. And that was fine. Axel walked beside him, unhurried, his tail low, his posture relaxed at last. He had completed his task. He did not need praise or reward. Duty, once fulfilled, was enough. As they disappeared into the trees, the wind stirred the snow one last time, erasing their tracks as completely as it had erased the night's violence. Somewhere far away, a young soldier fought for life in a warm hospital. Somewhere closer, an old soldier walked home with his dog, carrying the quiet truth that some battles never truly end, and neither does the will to fight them. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. They arrive as steady hands that refuse to let go, as an old soldier who answers one last call, as a loyal who stands guard through the longest night. In moments when hope feels frozen, God often works through ordinary souls, placing the right person, the right courage, and the right compassion in our path at exactly the right time. What saved a life in that snow-covered forest was not strength alone, but faith woven into action. A reminder that even when we feel forgotten, we are never truly alone. In our daily lives, we may not face blizzards or battlefields, but we all encounter nights where fear, pain, or doubt seem overwhelming. When that happens, remember this: God's miracles often come quietly, through kindness, perseverance, and love we choose to give. Be that miracle for someone else when you can. May God bless you and protect you. May He bring warmth to your cold days, strength to your tired hearts, and hope when the road feels uncertain. We pray that peace walks with you and your loved ones, today and always. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts or prayers, and subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, courage, and compassion can reach those who need them most. God bless you.